Reflection is an important part of creating and implementing flipped lessons. The first step is to get yourself a teacher's journal. There will be checkpoints at each step of the process where you'll want to reflect on your experiences and your ideas. You'll also want to ask yourself a few important questions and write the answers down in your teacher's journal. Imagine that there isn't just one of you, but 2 or 3 of you teaching your class each day. Wouldn't that be great? You could observe your students more, conference with them more, and run small groups more effectively. We could even help our students learn and review new concepts using both in-class techniques and methods they could use at home. Well, flipped learning actually makes this possible. Think about the following questions as you begin to use flipped lessons in your writing workshop. Before you begin, number 1, how can flipped learning help me address the wide variety of needs my students have in writing workshops? Number 2, what is my vision for using flipped learning in the classroom? Small group work, individualized learning, or both? Number 3, what are the lessons I find myself repeating throughout my writing workshops? How can flipped learning help? And number 4, how can I use flipped learning to increase student engagement, self-efficacy in my writing workshop? Reflecting on flipped learning, like the process of writing, takes practice. At this point, you've created at least one flipped lesson for generating ideas. Before moving on to your next lesson, think deeply about flipped lessons. During the generating phase, jot down your responses to these 4 questions in your teacher's journal. Number 1, in what way did flipped learning increase independence and engagement in the generating phase of writing? Number 2, what flipped lessons were most effective at helping students come up with ideas to write about? Number 3, did the flipped lessons help students learn strategies to overcome writing block? Number 4, in which ways did flipped learning help you differentiate instruction? Flipping a lesson takes trial and error. For example, you may find yourself frustrated by a new type of technology and want to give up on it. But hang in there, you'll figure it out. Once we've taken some time to reflect on what's worked and what is going well, we find the motivation we need to keep moving forward. Asking ourselves questions and asking our colleagues questions helps us develop strategies that work. After creating 1 or 2 flipped lessons, reflect on what's worked and whether you feel comfortable repeating the process. There is no need to experiment with a lot of different technology tools right away. Get good at what you know and what works for you. Pause for a moment to think about using flipped learning during the drafting phase of writing. Jot down in your teacher's journal responses to these questions. What flipped lessons help strengthen my students' writing stamina? Are students using flipped lessons independently to improve elements of their writing? Are they producing organized drafts? And finally, what formative assessment practices am I using? Are they working? How are my students setting goals? How often is this happening? Are my students using flipped lessons to accomplish their goals? In Writing Workshop, we encourage our students to use specific revision strategies and become confident revisers. We also need to consider the ways in which we need to revise our flipped learning practices. The writing process is a cycle, and it is our journey as creators and implementers of flipped lessons. We need to ask, am I creating lessons that are effective and engaging? Is there anything I need to add? Becoming more comfortable with the process and technology used to create flipped lessons brings new opportunities to create the most engaging, effective, and efficient writing workshops possible. Grab your teacher's journal, consider your work as a reviser of flipped lessons on revision, and jot down your responses to these questions. Which flipped lessons help students see the revision phase as an opportunity to strengthen their work? Are my students eager to use the flipped lessons? How can I increase engagement? What's working and what's not? Do I have a balance of teaching approaches in my flipped lessons? For example, prompting, inquiry, modeling strategies, or thinking aloud? Am I feeling limited by the technology I am using? What new tools might I try next? Take time now to stop and reflect on the process you have made so far in your efforts to create flipped lessons. Perhaps you need to be more precise in how you teach a strategy. Maybe the pace of a lesson is too fast or too slow, or the method you've used to implement the lesson is not working. Reflect on the following questions in your teacher's journal. Number 1, what's working and what isn't? Number 2, what additions or deletions do I need to make to the flipped editing lessons I'm creating? Are my students meeting their goals? Do they feel that flipped learning is helping them edit more effectively? Number 4, how are students using flipped lessons? For homework, small group work, or independently? Is it working? Number 5, what evidence do I need or have that my students are learning how to edit their writing? Number 6, what will I do about my students who have not applied lessons successfully? Now that you've come to the end of the writing workshop unit, it's time to reflect on what went well and what lessons you'd like to flip in the next unit. So set some goals for the future. Take a moment and reflect on the following questions. How did flipped learning help all of my students share and celebrate their writing in the publishing phase? What flipped lessons can I use in other units? Which lessons will be used over and over? How did flipped learning help me manage my time during the publishing phase? Which lessons worked better as a whole class mini lesson, and which lessons worked better as a flipped lesson? What flipped lessons could students create themselves? Reflection is very empowering, especially if you discuss your observations and experiences with a colleague or a friend. Productive conversations include sharing what worked, which technologies feel comfortable, which lessons were especially useful, and how you want to use flipped lessons in the future.